Afternoon now. We are at 12 noon in my time zone. I'm JP Jackson. Welcome to Not Your Typical Fantasy on the Icarus online queer book convention. Um, ooh, today I have got some interesting folks with me. I'm so excited to introduce you to because this is totally my jam. Um, the fantasy worlds that we're just maybe not quite used to. It's not all elves and orcs and Tolkien dragons and all the rest of it. So today I am very fortunate to have um, Des Schwartz, who I've got a pre-recorded reading to share with you. We have Dorian Graves.
Hello, hello.
And we have Glenn Quigley. So I'm
Hello.
just gonna give a quick introduction of both of these folks. So Dorian's from the mountains of Oregon and lecture halls of Mills College. Dorian is an artistic cryptid found in the Pacific Northwest. The Deadly Drinks series takes urban fantasy to a whole new level, incorporating creatures from an international perspective and realms that I can only describe as fairyland with a hint of acid. And you can see my chihuahua in the background is approving.
Aw.
And also with me, we have Glenn Quigley, who writes historical fantasy and hails from Northern Ireland. I got that right, right?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. I live in Northern Ireland now. Yeah.
And the Moth and Moon series is a fantastical nautical voyage with the main character of Robin Ship, who is just near and dear to my heart. And his latest release, We Cry the Sea, is on my TBR list. And next up, I cannot wait to get into it. So, welcome, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a reading session, so we're going to start off with Dorian. And before we start, do you have anything else to add?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Actual things other than just reading from my book. So this is the second book in the Deadly Drink series. The cover art has been done by M. Brackett and editing done by William Tracy. This is a long labor of love, rewritten more times than I can count, but I'm so happy with how it turned out, and I hope you all enjoy it too.
I'm halfway through it. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm going to go on mute and give you everything.
Total complete power. Mwahaha. Alrighty, so without further ado, let us begin with chapter 1 with Jared Gallows. I hadn't planned to be run over by a Minotaur's motorcycle. If I'd been standing in the middle of the road, being ambushed by a motorcycle would make some sense. But this happened deep in the woods, perhaps a mile off a dirt road only frequented by logging trucks in the last dregs of summer when falling leaves are fragile and flammable in equal measure. I had beasts in these woods on my hit list, but not the Minotaur. I reeked of blood from my own wounds, and also of cheap whiskey because I'd upended half a bottle over my head to deter my intended mark, which certainly hadn't been a Minotaur, from attacking me. One might ask, what kind of idiot has instincts that scream, grab the motorcycle and throw it into a goddamn tree instead of getting out of the way? The answer is me, Jared Gallows. What? The Minotaur croaked in the second he and his bike were airborne. The ever-loving ship. Boom! The crash of his impact shook the forest. The hide behind I'd just fought, my actual intended target, twitched at my feet, scraping foot-long claws against the forest floor. The silver manacles I'd clasped around its wrists were the only reason it didn't use the surprise Minotaur attack as an opportunity to flee or to escape out of sight and stab me in the back, as its name suggested. I should have ignored the ambush and lugged the hide behind to the car. But I'm a paranormal investigator by trade because I'm always too damn curious for my own good. I grabbed one of my pistols and kept it aimed on the Minotaur as I approached. I waited to speak until the bull-headed man sat up and stared at me, terror in his eyes and splinters of bark sticking into his skull. You've got 2 seconds to explain. The Minotaur patted the ground to decide for a weapon. He found only crumpled metal.
Forgive me, Lord Nallum. Well, you see,
He cleared his throat.
I misbetook that hide behind for, well, you until it was too late. Appearances can be deceiving, right?
His laugh was closer to a pitiful bray. I wanted to pretend I'd heard him wrong, but I wasn't drunk enough. Right, which is why you'll be more surprised if you actually find him. My family bore plenty of curses, but I wasn't the one forced to be a vessel for the ancient eldritch asshole known as Nallum.
Yeah, I guess I. Wait, you're not him?
The Minotaur bolted to hooves and took in our surroundings with rapid, wild eyes.
But you're a Holderkin. I was told to look for a Holderkin, one with what did she call it? A malicious aura.
The Minotaur looked to me. Down to the hide behind, a bristling ball of fur that seemed to be crafted from shadows with glowing coals of hate for eyes, and long, gangly limbs that ended in even longer claws. Me again.
Well, shoot. I must have muddled your auras together, huh?
I nodded. In all honesty, I had no idea. Other supernatural beings, like the super strong and hollow bodied Holdras on my mother's side of the family, were taught to sense each other through some sixth sense from a young age. I'd never had the knack. Otherwise, the Minotaur wouldn't have been able to ambush me. The Minotaur buried his face in his hands with a mournful moo.
The rest of the herd will never let me live this down. But if you're not Nallum.
I considered leaving him there. Nothing good ever came of dealing with Nallum, and I should have spared him from the torture that had plagued my family for years. Plus, the hide behind kept hissing, and I feared it might try to break away soon. I offered the Minotaur a hand instead. If you're that desperate to see him, follow me. The Minotaur took the offering, so I pulled him to his feet, even though he was almost twice my size. Jared Gallows, paranormal investigator. Grab what's left of your bike and come on. While Minotaurs may look human from a distance, they've still got a bovine head and hooves, plus a layer of hide over all that muscle. This one was light brown and dressed in motorcycle leathers, liberally covered in patches and spikes. The only thing throwing the picture off was his puppy-like demeanor. His giant arms, which I almost swore were as long as I was tall, scooped up the motorcycle parts like they were little more than a fallen bag of groceries.
My name's Bolton, and I really appreciate this. I've got a special message for Nallum. An old friend needs his help, you see.
I scoffed at that. You better hope he's feeling sociable. I dragged the hide behind after me as I led Bolton toward where we'd parked the car. My job was to capture a local pair of hide behinds before they could mate and spawn. Problem was, hide behinds were fast and prone to backstabbing, so much that almost no one ever saw their faces and lived. It was rare for them to drop their guard even among their own kind. I had a hard time looking at the one I'd caught. It was like staring at a gaping hole in the universe, albeit one that kept trying to claw me even with manacles searing its wrist. I asked Bolton as we walked, "Tell me, what do you know about Nallum?" Bolton hummed as he thought, almost loud enough to drown out the sound of his hooves crunching leaves.
He has power over bones, that's the big thing. Living and dead. I was told to never shake hands with him. He's ancient too, made a lot of enemies, but he's loyal deep down to his friends and his dream.
That last part struck an anger in me as I worked hard to keep buried. I helped him kill his own ex-wife, after he'd helped her capture me and my partner and almost sell us, of course.
They must not have been friends, Bolton answered with a shrug. All I guess I really know is my entire town's in trouble if we can't get his help. And if that happens, things will be bad enough. Even the humans will notice.
I swore under my breath. Human minds can't comprehend the supernatural. Their minds twist and warp to explain away anything monstrous or magical that they see. There were rare exceptions. My father was one, and my boyfriend had been another. But if a situation were bad enough that multiple humans would notice, would be forced to comprehend something their minds shouldn't be exposed to? No, I couldn't think about that now. There was the car up ahead, a Mercury Grand Marquis that had once been red, but was spray painted black with the words Crusher 000 painted in white along its sides. I'd gotten it from a destruction derby for the low price of exorcising a ghost. It was a tank of a car, but to my disappointment, it was currently vacant. The others hadn't made it back yet.
This is your ride?
Sure is. I popped open the trunk and tossed the hide behind in. I'd spent most of my last job's check lining it with silver for containing creatures like this hide behind. Maybe I could get more jobs rescuing supernatural beings this way instead of extermination gigs. Feel free to leave your motorcycle parts here. I don't think anyone else will come by to steal them. Bolton did so, then for some reason he knelt next to the Merc and bowed his head as if in prayer. He said when he stood,
It's certainly well loved. May it continue to guide you well.
I offered my thanks, confused as I was, and we returned to the woods. When my brother, or Nallum, is out fighting, he's easy to find. All one has to do is follow where the bones should be, but aren't. Layers of decaying skin and muscle, lying flat on the ground, torn so skeletons could be freed. Holes where long-buried remains have been unearthed through sheer force of will. I felt a dull ache in my jaw as he reached out with his powers from afar and tried to pull, only to remember that he hadn't killed me. Yet. The last days of summer were warm enough that the corpses stank as they rotted, nestled by decaying leaves and flies gorging themselves before the autumn chill arrived. I heard a crack up ahead. Couldn't tell if branch or bone. Undergrowth rustled behind us. Bolton stumbled to a stop.
I think there's another one of those things behind us,
He whispered. He balled his meaty hands into fists the size of my head. I also shifted into a fighting stance. No guns. I didn't want to risk killing these targets. Are you actually sensing it this time, or is this just wishful thinking? Bolton sniffed the air.
This time, I'd bet my...
Whatever it was, he would have won that bet. A lanky-limbed, bristled form darted out of the trees behind us and pounced onto the Minotaur's back, digging its claws deep into his hide. Bolton bellowed in pain. He swung a wide hook, but the hide behind blurred as it dragged its claws through his flesh, and all he hit was solid earth. Before I could react, two more figures burst out of the foliage. The first was tall and skinny enough that his bones jutted out through his near-white skin, stumbling toward us like a newborn foal taking its first wobbling steps. The other was a bear. Not all of it, just the skeleton and a couple stubborn scraps of rotting flesh that wouldn't fall off its bones. It also, for some reason, had 6 legs and a set of horns. Hey! Perfect timing! I've almost got this hide behind, but it just occurred to me. How am I supposed to handcuff this darn thing? Am I supposed to cuff it to me, or can I, cuff it to this elk bear I made? The only person who would even think to ask that was Rex Gallows, my lanky little brother with a fascination for magical skeletal taxidermy. In fact, he was so proud of his creation that it took another scream for the Minotaur for him to actually notice the fight. Oh, shit! Who's our new friend here? And that's where I'll call it. Corpses and Cognac. Check it out.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dorian. So I have to ask you, if you were to try and wedge your fiction into a category, how would you describe it? Because it's definitely fantasy. It's got that international pull with using all these different creatures from around the world. How would you classify it?
See, at first glance, I call it urban fantasy, except it's not urban. They barely touch cities. Honestly, I call it new weird fiction, because honestly, a lot of my inspirations are Neil Gaiman, China Mayville, a lot of Grant Morrison and comic books, a lot of the new weird authors like that just take our modern settings and then just add a bunch of weird stuff that you wouldn't think goes together, and suddenly it's bizarre, fantastical worlds that came out of a fever dream. Sometimes literally.
I think that's a pretty apt description. When you go into the other realm, the Arcadia, that's just a whole nother level of wow.
Oh, thank you. I have a lot of fun writing Arcadia.
I bet.
The world where anything can happen and does happen and really should stop happening, but it won't.
No kidding. So thank you so much. Stick around. We're going to listen to Des Schwartz next.
Whew.
Hi, I'm Des Schwartz, and I'll be reading a scene from my Dreampunk novel, Rome. To kind of set the scene for you, it's about Ethan, who's a college student, and he's been suffering from nightmares and scary daydreams that are interfering with his daily life. So at the behest of his friend, he goes to visit a doctor to see if he can find help. I hope you enjoy it. Ethan took a deep, calming breath and then turned and entered the building through its glass doors. He tried to appear confident by standing straight and readjusted the strap on his messenger bag so it wasn't slouching off his shoulder. The general interior design of the office was black and silver, with the occasional splash of deep purple. On a glass coffee table in front of a few black leather chairs, where magazines were normally spread out, was a peculiar book that proclaimed itself an almanac and a deck of tarot cards. Ethan eyed them suspiciously, as they weren't something one would expect to see lying around a doctor's office. All kinds welcome, Dr. Grady Hunter, 222 South Onyx Avenue. Ethan read the business card again to make sure he was at the right place. He hadn't been able to schedule an appointment since the card provided no number, so he decided to go in person and ask. Directly in front of him was the receptionist's desk, and it was similarly decorated, with a scrying ball on one side and what appeared to be a Ouija board directly across from it. It was hard to tell because there were books and file folders stacked on top. It was as if he'd accidentally stepped into a fortune teller's shop instead of a medical office. Sitting behind the desk was a young, waifish woman with pale skin and short black hair, bobbed to frame her jawline. Her bangs were cut perfectly straight, which created a bold effect around her already angular face. She wore a simple, sleeveless black dress Ethan thought was questionably low cut for a professional office. The woman lifted her attention from her computer and gave him the once-over with her piercing blue eyes, which unsettled him. Hanging loosely from her neck and accenting the deep cut of her dress was an Art Deco-inspired necklace with a silver chain holding a charm designed to be a bird of some sort. Ethan guessed it was supposed to be a swan emerging from a flower or some similar allegory. "Can I help you?" she asked with a crisp tone to divert his eyes away from her neckline. Her bright pink lipstick and overly rouged cheeks were a stark contrast to the rest of her appearance. She took out an appointment ledger and scanned it, presumably to see whom he might be. He couldn't help but notice that she'd matched her nail polish to the pop of color in her makeup. My name is Ethan Rome. I didn't make an appointment. Sorry. I was hoping to walk in." He stuttered in spite of his efforts to not seem nervous. Vivian Edwards, according to the nameplate on her desk, waved him toward one of the chairs and stated simply, "Dr. Hunter will be out in a minute. You may wait there. Make yourself comfortable." She resumed typing and ignoring his existence. The cold greeting from the woman had only made him more uncomfortable. Ethan moved to the chair as instructed, but before he was seated, another figure entered the room. The young man, dressed in Rocket Dog sneakers, jeans, and a carelessly unbuttoned blue plaid shirt with a black Scooby-Doo t-shirt underneath, was quite the opposite of Vivian. He had a perk to his step, a smile on his face, and a sparkle to his brown eyes. He was humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a Three Dog Night song as he entered the room. His appearance brought a pleasantness to the space that hadn't been there before as he strutted in and grabbed the folders on Vivian's desk. The man, who seemed to be around the same age as Ethan, finally noticed his presence and stopped humming. He grinned and glanced at Vivian, nodding in Ethan's direction. "Who's the new guy?" Vivian didn't stop typing, but answered shortly. "He's here to be interviewed." "Interviewed? Oh. The doctor will probably want to find out what my symptoms are before he takes me on as a new patient," Ethan reasoned to himself as he sat awkwardly, shifting positions in his chair. "Oh, can't wait." The man turned on his heel and exited to his hidden office around the corner, peeking over his shoulder at Ethan before he disappeared. Vivian rolled her eyes. "That's Benny. He's an idiot." "He seems nice," Ethan responded, trying to be polite. Vivian gave him another once-over with her piercing gaze and then settled into her work again without another word. Not a great bedside manner, but I like her brazen honesty. Although, I find the word naive suits him best. He's actually not an idiot. A deep but charming voice chimed in. It's debatable, Vivian murmured. The voice had a British lilt to it that was clearly beginning to fall away with American influence. Ethan turned to discover a tall man with blonde wavy hair that was brushed to one side. He appeared in his mid-30s, which was surprising since Ethan had been expecting someone more around Arthur's age. Dr. Grady Hunter was a stunning figure, dressed in charcoal gray slacks and a matching unbuttoned sports coat. The ensemble was paired with a gray pressed button-up shirt underneath. He'd missed fastening a couple of buttons, and it hung open a bit loosely at the top. Despite his tall and slim frame, he had broad shoulders and high cheekbones, which made him classically handsome and slightly intimidating. Ethan would have felt diminutive next to him if it weren't for the man's charismatic smile and kind gray eyes that made him seem friendly and down to earth. Grady greeted him with a nod and opened his office door wide. "Welcome, Ethan. Please come in." Grady indicated for Ethan to take a seat, and then he rounded his desk and also sat, carefully studying Ethan's every move. "Sorry for not making an appointment, Dr. Hunter," Ethan said, unsure of how to start things off. "No need for apologies, and I insist you call me Grady." The doctor smiled pleasantly. "Arthur advised you might be stopping by." "Oh," Ethan acknowledged, a little annoyed at his friend's presumptuous behavior. "That's good." "Indeed." Grady grabbed a pen and a form from his top desk drawer as Ethan watched anxiously. "Ethan Rome," stated Grady, writing his name on the top of the form. "Let's get to it, shall we?" Ethan motioned that he was ready, although he was very distracted. He'd imagined the office would be more sterile, like most doctors' offices, but instead he found himself in a room that was more of a private study. There was even a fireplace, though he noted it was a faux one. Grady jumped right to it. "What are your qualifications?" "Qualifications?" Ethan attempted to focus. "I guess he means why I'm here." "Well, I've been having night terrors for a few years now. I dream vicious creatures are attacking me in my sleep, and I wake feeling like I'm still in the nightmare. My body is paralyzed sometimes, so I'm aware I'm awake, but I can't move, which causes me to panic. Recently, though, it's gotten worse, because now I'm also dreaming during the day." "Is that it?" Ethan shrugged. "Pretty much." "Damn, I thought it'd be something more interesting," Grady muttered in disappointment. Ethan, taken aback by the doctor's reaction, was offended. "Well, they're pretty awful. I was attacked by a werewolf yesterday." Grady's eyebrows flew upward and his eyes became intense and inquisitive. "Really? Where?" "In the dream. The daydream." Ethan wondered if Arthur had sent him here as part of a bad practical joke. "Ah." Grady's energetic demeanor subsided, and he quickly returned to his former casual self. "All right then, do you have any past experience?" "No, that's it really," Ethan answered limply. Grady set down his pen and form. He leaned back in his chair, eyeing Ethan considerately. "All right. These next few questions are standard procedure. Please answer them honestly." Ethan nodded that he understood. "Do you believe in ghosts, demons, or angels?" Grady asked nonchalantly. Ethan was puzzled but decided to play along. "Well, I don't disbelieve in them, but I've also never seen one." "Fair enough." Grady scratched something out on his form. "Do you frequently experience déjà vu, hear disembodied voices, or converse with other species?" Ethan scoffed. No." Grady raised a curious eyebrow at him, as if he thought Ethan might be lying, but then marked out a few more things on his form. Ethan tried to lean forward to see what they were, but couldn't make out anything from his vantage point. "I'm sorry, but what's the point of these questions?" Ethan interrupted, growing impatient. "I need to figure out exactly how you'll fit in here," Grady explained in a matter-of-fact manner. "What I really need to discern is what makes you special." Finally, a question Ethan found comfortable answering. "Nothing," he responded confidently. He had quite enough of the odd doctor and his weird patient interview. "I'm sorry for wasting your time. I know this will be a huge disappointment to Arthur since he wanted me to meet with you so badly, but I'm not special. I'm the opposite of that." "Oh, how so?" Grady prodded, apparently engaged by Ethan's testy tone. "Look, I may have these psychotic dream episodes every day, but I still go to school. I still fulfill obligations and responsibilities. I've got my shit handled. Ethan caught himself, hoping he didn't offend the doctor with his language. Grady seemed unfazed, so he continued. I don't usually run to people with my problems like I did today, which I now kind of regret, Ethan admitted. Although I guess it was worth it just to see your cool office. By the way, were those tarot cards out there? Yes, Grady confirmed. His interest seemed piqued. Inexplicably flustered, Ethan continued his rant. Anyway, the point is, I'm fine. I'm not special or in need of any help. I don't know why I came here. I'm just weird, and I'm fine with that. No big deal. He grabbed his bag to leave when Grady surprised him. You're hired. Ethan froze. What? What? He echoed himself aloud, perplexed. You seem like a confident and resilient young man. Your talents could be strengthened with proper training, which I, of course, will provide. You will, however, need to work on your temperament, but as you saw with Vivian, that can be done during the course of your employment. I understand it's not something that can change about a person overnight. Sadly, Grady conceded, as if he'd spent many years trying to figure out a way to do just that. Overall, I believe Arthur was right. You'd be a great intern here. Ethan was overwhelmed with confusion. This was a job interview? He wasn't sure if he should continue his upward motion or sit down. He had kind of stopped moving in the middle of standing up. Yes, and I think it went very well. Grady beamed as he sauntered around the desk to pat Ethan on the shoulder in a warm welcome. Ethan collapsed into the chair, dumbfounded, as he processed what had happened. Grady leaned back to prop himself on his desk and crossed his arms to stare down at Ethan. Now, he was the one who seemed bewildered. Why on earth did you think you were here?
And so we are now back. That was Des Schwartz. Des is a writer of Dreampunk, paranormal, and LGBTQ fiction with spellbinding humor and romance. She hails from Texas, where when not writing, can be found drinking lattes and perusing antique shops for anything that might be formerly owned by a vampire. Des's series Rome was my first introduction to Dreampunk, realms where world building is derived from dreamscapes and all is possible. I loved Des's book, and I encourage everybody to go check it out. Des has joined us in the chat room, so by all means, if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop her a question. And now I'm going to hand over the reins to Glenn.
Okay. If you're sure.
I'm totally sure you can do this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Glenn Quigley. I write historical fantasy / fiction. My series is The Moth and Moon. That was the first book. The Lion Lies Waiting is the second, and I'll be reading from We Cry the Sea, which is the third book in the series, and it came out a couple of months ago. I'm going to have to ask for your patience because despite writing 3 books, this is my first ever reading, so we'll see how it goes.
You can do it.
Thank you very much, Dorian. The setting for the books is a little fishing village on a tiny little island in the year 1781. So picture like little thatched cottages and cobbled streets and kind of quaint setting, I suppose. But it's set in a kind of an alt history where religion didn't really catch on very much and died out about 1,000 years ago. So society has grown up without putting any expectations on people. So in regards to gender expression and sexual orientation, it's people are just take them as they are. So there's no big coming out stories. It's not that sort of setting. So this is the first chapter of book 3. So wish me luck. Finding a goal in one's bathroom has a way of bringing sharp focus just what massive beasts they truly are. They certainly appear large when harassing people at the seafront or circling overhead, but coming face to face with one in a domestic setting really shows them in a whole new light. It wasn't actually using the privy, of course, though its demeanour suggested it could have if it wanted to. Rather, it was content to simply sit there and wait out the bad weather. It wasn't until Robin's ship approached that it began to caw and squawk furiously, flapping its wings with an air of indignity, as if protesting at him having the temerity to walk in without first knocking, which, in all fairness to the gull, he had done, but then it was his lavatory, and up until that point he'd never known it to be frequented by any kind of wildlife whatsoever. Despite his name, Robin had little affinity for or interest in birds, especially gulls. He found them pests for the most part. He was a fisherman and spent more time than he liked trying to shoo them away from his catch. This one in particular was known to him as the Admiral, one of a pair of seagulls who fought a never-ending battle for supremacy of the harbour. Robin stood there in the whitewashed room shouting at the bird to leave for a good 5 minutes before accepting it wasn't going to be quite so easy. He slowly slipped off his woolen overcoat and held it open, approaching as cautiously as his enormous frame would allow, and then flung it quickly over the toilet. The gull was not amused, nor was it shy in expressing as much. After some kerfuffle, Robin managed to bundle it up in his coat, fearful the whole time of injuring its wings. He did like gulls, but he'd never be needlessly cruel or violent towards them either. He wrestled the creature out of the room, across the narrow hall and into his bedroom. The doors to his balcony were open. The method of admission, he suspected. He shook his coat open and the gull tumbled out, mewing loudly, before plodding to the balcony and flying off into the rain. It looked back to squawk at him one last time. An insult, Robin was certain. He shut the doors and sighed. He was late. He pulled close the front door of his tall, thin house and trudged down towards the harbour. He tugged his flat cap low over his eyes, though the weather was already beginning to ease. With his meaty thumb, he rubbed the palm of his left hand. Injured the previous year in the night of the winter solstice, it had never properly healed. His hand was always stiff now, with a deep ache and a white web-like scar. Rubbing helped, as he found it seized up if he neglected it too long, especially in cold weather. He'd been advised by the local doctor to keep rubbing it as often as possible as it kept the blood flowing or some such. Robin didn't really understand the mechanics of it. He'd been eager to resume fishing after the worst of the winter season had passed, but quickly discovered his efforts hampered by his injury. He tried to pass it off as a minor inconvenience, but deep down he knew it was serious. He'd been a fisherman all his adult life, and before. He'd started when he was a young boy, after his father had died, and he couldn't imagine any other way of living. He didn't want to imagine it. The hurricane of the previous summer, just a year ago, had turned his whole world upside down, and while he couldn't have been happier about it, the upheaval had been daunting. What he craved now more than anything was some peace and quiet. With his bull neck, jug ears, and hooded eyes, Robin had never considered himself an especially attractive man, so quite what the undeniably handsome Edwin Fariner saw in him, he couldn't quite say. Yet there Edwin was, sheltering for the rain against the market hall pillar, waiting for him. He was tall, though not as tall as Robin, in his early 40s, so 10 years Robin's junior, with receding, close-shaved ginger hair. His smile never failed to light up Robin's heart. "You're late," Edwin said. "He won't be happy." "Oh, when is he ever happy?" The rain stopped and the clouds broke. They stood gazing at the roof of the moth and moon, shielding their eyes from the midday sun. Atop the enormous inn, workers hammered nails and sawed wood. A framework was coming together, six-sided and spacious enough to comfortably fit 10 men. Robin pulled his cap lower and cupped a hand around his mouth. "Oi, Duncan!" His deep voice carried clear across the harbour. "Time to eat! Come on!" From the rooftop, Duncan Hunger waved us and began to climb down the many ladders strapped to the rain-slick tiles. The moth and moon was expansive and ever-changing, a hunk of wood, glass, and lime wash which seemed to regularly sprout fresh bay windows, bud whole new rooms, and blossom balconies. Its roof, or rather roofs, rose and fell like the sea. A tiled wave here, a slight swell there, and took some skill to navigate. Duncan grasped one of the numerous chimney stacks and used it to swing himself around to firmer footing. When his boots finally touched the ground, he shook the raindrops from his coat. "You're late," he said. "Only a little," Robin said. "I had a visit from the Admiral." "It's all well and good for you two to swan up whenever the mood strikes you," Duncan said, "but some of us have work to be getting on with." Robin chuckled again. Duncan's natural state was irked, and he never needed a particular reason to complain. He cleaned all the lenses in his unique spectacles with a handkerchief. Small, round, and fixed with multiple thin armatures, the glasses were of Duncan's own design. He was forever fiddling with them, setting one lens in place and then another. Robin wondered if Duncan would be forced to add even more arms with even more lenses as he grew older. Duncan was Edwin's age, but a couple of heads shorter. Squat, burly, black wavy hair, long sideburns, and an expression that indicated he always had something more important to be, so if you wanted him to stay, you better make it worth his while. "How's it going?" Robin said, pointing upwards. "Slowly," Duncan said, fixing the spectacles back into place on his button nose. "You should have finished the basic frame by now. The others are dragging their heels." "Nothing to do with you resetting the wood every 10 minutes and telling everyone they're doing it wrong," Edwin said. Whoever could have told you such a thing? Duncan asked. It's a gross exaggeration and a terrible slight on my good name. Can I help it if I'm a perfectionist? I want this new belt hair to stand the test of time, to be. Duncan trailed off and pointed out to sea. That boat's coming in a bit fast, isn't it? Robin turned and squinted before reaching into the pocket of his long navy overcoat, from which he produced a battered copper spyglass. He extended it to its full length. The glass was a touch foggy, but enough to determine a single occupant at the helm of the lugger. Can you see who it is? Edwin asked. No, Robin said. I can see his face, but wherever he is, he needs to slow down or he'll run aground. Robin ambled to the pier, quickly overtaken by the much sprightlier Edwin and Duncan. All three men frantically waved their arms and shouted, trying to alert the sailor to the danger. The sailboat began to turn, taking it away from the harbour and straight toward the headland, straight toward the rocks. With a terrifying crack that landed like a thunderstrike, the boat splintered against the rocky outcrops, and its occupant was flung into the water. Without a moment's thought, Robin ditched his cap, overcoat, and jumper. He hopped around, pulling off his boots, before diving into the sea. Edwin followed. They splashed about in the choppy waters, unable to find the man. Robin, Duncan said, over there. To your right, not the other way. Starboard, man, starboard! Robin kicked his massive legs furiously to avoid being dashed against the rocks himself. With one deep breath, he dived beneath the surface to search where Duncan had indicated, but there was no sign. Underwater, Edwin was pointing furiously. Robin turned to find the figure of a man floating limply. Together, he and Edwin grabbed the victim and brought him to the surface. Robin's lungs were burning, and he gasped for air. Once ashore, they laid the drowning man on his back. He was breathing and coughed up some seawater. Blood poured from his left eye, dyeing part of his white beard crimson. He was huge, as big as Robin himself. A crowd gathered around him. Robin brushed the man's lank hair away from the wound. Easy, easy, Robin said. You're safe now. What? Wait, Vince? Hello, brother, Vince said, his usually growling voice weak and cracked. Let's get him to the inn, Edwin said. No, Vince said, grabbing firmly onto Robin's arm. Too many people. We'll take you to my house then, Robin said. It's not far. They loaded Vince onto a borrowed cart and took him up the steep slope of Anchor Rise. He placed one huge arm across Edwin's shoulders, the other across Robin's, and together they all sidled through the blue front door of Robin's home. Scarlet dots gathered on the black and white tiles of the hallway floor as blood dripped from Vince's eye, yet still he stared at the oil painting on the upstairs landing. Once inside Robin's front room, they put him by the fireplace and wrapped bandages around his head and leg. They would have to do until the doctor could be summoned. I didn't recognise you under all the hair, Duncan said. Haven't had much chance to get a cut, Vince said. Been busy. Too busy to visit us, like you said you would. Here now, are they? Edwin handed him a mug of water and Vince sipped it, then pawed at his throat, obviously in some discomfort. How did you end up running aground? Duncan asked. Vince sipped his drink and said nothing. Robin frowned. Vince, did you hear him? What? Edwin coughed and placed his hand on Robin's arm. Let's give him time to get his head clear. He's obviously had a terrible shock. Robin had only met Vince once before, around the same time he'd injured his hand. Before then, he didn't even know he had a brother. They'd promised to stay in touch, and they did, after a fashion. A couple of short letters had been exchanged, but nothing more. Well, you can stay here as long as you like, of course. My home is your home, Robin said. How's he going to manage all those stairs with his leg the way it is? Duncan asked. You'd be better off staying with me, I suppose. Vince growled something approaching gratitude. Help me up, he said. You don't have to go right now, Robin said, as he once more let Vince lean on him. All the way, Vince said. Robin guided him back to the black and white tiles. Vince stood and pointed at the upstairs landing. Who's he? Oh, that's right, you never met him. It's our dad. It's Captain Erasmus' ship, Robin said. They were painted a few years before he died. Vince shook his head. Can't be Dad. Why not? Robin asked. Because just this morning, I saw that man in Wolfchase Asylum. And that's the end of the first chapter.
Ooh, so many questions.
Right? I love reading Glenn's stories. It's like walking through history in an old nautical seafaring town and smelling the kerosene-dipped planks that created the docks. I just love it. You're brilliant.
Thank you very much.
And don't you ever shy away from readings again. You did wonderful.
It was delightful.
I know.
Thank
I
you
could
very
sit and listen all day. And you've got lots of support in the comments section too.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have a tendency to mumble, and I have a tendency to get caught up in my own voice. So I'm surprised I got through that without doing this, without doing this thing here.
You were great. Uh, all right. I think it's my turn. Goodness. And of course, you all have lovely copies of your books to show and whatnot. And do you think I have any of my books even anywhere near me? No, I don't. So all I can do is show you a picture. I'm going to read a section from, can we see it? There we go. Magic or Die. That is my second novel. And just to kind of give you a bit of a setup, um,
I've read
in
it. It's brilliant.
oh, thank you.
Loved it.
In Magic or Die, there's a certain percentage of the population that have unique special gifts, and we call them magicals. And magicals fall into one of three categories: either elemental, so you can control some kind of element, lightning, ice, wind, that kind of stuff. Or psychs, which are, the telekinetic, telepathic kind of realm of things, or arcanes. And arcanes are a bit different. They're folks who are possessed by a demon, and we're not really sure whether it's the demon's magical ability that's coming through or if it's a symbiotic kind of relationship. Um, so in Magic or Die, there's a facility called the CMRD, the Canadian Centre for Magical Research and Development. And the CMRD promises to help people, but really they're selling off people who end up being able to control their abilities to the highest bidder. And the main character, James Martin, is a psych who has been brought in to assist with a group of young adults who cannot get control over their abilities. And they're lethal, not even to other people, but also to themselves. So, but James is broken. He's very much the anti hero. And the reason why he was brought in was because he used to be an employee there, but he walked out on his contract after the facility euthanized one of his students because they could not get control over their abilities. So he's got a lot of baggage. And this student also happened to be a past relationship. And the student is haunting James. And at first, we kind of think maybe the haunting is just in his head. Turns out it's actually a haunting. And so, one of his new students, Annabelle, who's possessed not by just one demon, but an entire horde, has taken it upon herself to exorcise Cody, the dead student. So, here we go. Annabelle had spent all afternoon and part of the evening in the center of the hangar, creating an elaborate glyph marking on the floor of the warehouse. Various concentric circles, overlapping pentagrams, and other magical scribbling, which meant nothing to me, but everything to the spirit realm. As I passed by Annabelle, she looked up, her hair mussed and hanging forward, covering part of her face. Her nose was covered in chalk dust. Still, she smiled. How's it going? I stopped and crouched near her, inspecting the intricacy of the working area. Not too bad. I'm almost done. Do I want to know what all this does? I asked. Well, it's complicated, but each of these circles, and she pointed around the perimeter, are for us. Well, except you. Then she pointed to the center. That one big one in the middle, that's yours. Once you step inside, you'll need to call Cody and attract him here. You'll be caught with him, and then I have to recite this verse here. She grabbed a book from a pile she had collected, leafed through several pages, and then pointed at an incantation. That should do it. I thought there was more holy water and waving of crosses involved. She looked at me and smirked. You watch too many horror movies. Well, other than the hours you've spent here, it all just seems kind of simple, no? Well, that remains to be seen. I have a few backup plans in case Cody decides that moving on isn't what he wants. If I have to force him out, then there are 3 other possible scripts I can read. I have them bookmarked, but I hope it will be as easy as you think. She looked at me, a little exasperated. So tomorrow then? Oh, no, we're doing this tonight. It's better done during darkness. Well, not that you can tell day from night in the middle of here, but the energies are better at night. But you look exhausted. I'll be okay. Besides, I've got all of you to lean on afterwards. So some time has passed. Are you sure about this? Isaiah asked as we walked into the hangar. Everyone had dined together except for Annabelle, who was still in the hangar getting ready for Cody's ceremony. Annabelle is convinced we need to do this, I said. And so I trust her, and I don't want anything to happen that would jeopardize our plans to make sure you guys pass your finals. Pass your finals had become our code word for get the hell out of here. As we approached the magical circle where Cody was about to transition from this world into the next, Annabelle appeared from the shadows. Swirls of demon mist parted as she walked out from her own darkness. You're just on time. We need to start now. The moon's in the right position in the sky. Sure, I said as a tickle of uncertainty fluttered across my stomach and settled lower into my guts. What do you need us to do? Well, you're the main attraction, so carefully step into that circle. No, don't step on the writing. You'll have to maneuver around the lines. Remember that tail Isaiah had outside his protective circle during the demon contracts? Same principle. Don't wreck the sigils. She waved a finger at me, just like my mother used to when I was doing something wrong. Okay, good. Just stand there, she said once I'd positioned myself. Isaiah, Chris, you stand there and there. She pointed to 2 spots opposite each other. And then Camilla and Ning here and here. Annabelle walked over to a small pile of books and picked up a few volumes, then headed over to the last blank circle in the massive hex mark. This is kind of scary, Ning said. The others nodded. Okay, are we all ready? Annabelle asked. There were tentative nods all around. However, I wasn't seeing or feeling optimistic enthusiasm from anyone. James, when I point at you, I want you to call out to Cody, but you have to say it with importance and force. Got it? Yep, got it. Here goes nothing, she said as she tossed one of the books out in front of her. It abruptly stopped, floating briefly, and then hung in one spot, suspended in midair. Annabelle waved her hand over the tome. The cover flipped open and several pages rustled as she made her way to the correct incantation. It stopped on the desired page. Annabelle started reading. Here in the night, where spirits roam without light, we call upon the ghost and the one it calls a host, tethered and linked, cast together, indistinct. Come to us, reveal your intentions, not just shadow, not apprehension, just you and us, an ascension. Annabelle's voice lilted with the rhyme. She sounded otherworldly, and for the briefest of moments I could have pictured her as a benign forest nymph, not the dark girl possessed by a demon horde. And then she pointed at me. Random old memories of Cody swarmed my head when my hands turned dead cold and clammy. In that moment, I regretted giving Annabelle the permission to do this, but it was too late now. James, now! Annabelle whispered. But despite the breathy words, the urgency came through. Cody! I yelled, as fear and betrayal clawed at me with sharp talons. We waited as the air around us became heavy and still, but that didn't last long. Annabelle's dark mist wafted on the air currents, expanding gradually. Snaky white vapors writhed across the floor, winding into the middle of the circle where I stood. The space within the charmed circle filled up, leaving us knee-deep in ashen-tinted fog. Cody's corporeal body gradually formed, but this time he was missing a good chunk of the skin from his face. Fingers had fallen off, and one ear hung from a black sinew of flesh. It turned my stomach looking at him. He floated closer and put his lips a breath away from my earlobe. I shivered. This is different. You called me. Do you want me? Have you ditched the other one? The one you cannot save? Look at me. Touch me like you used to. No, Cody. It's time. You don't belong here, I said. The hairs on the back of my arms were standing straight up as Cody brushed up against my back. I belong with you. Annabelle recited the next verse in her spellbook. Through the doorway, pass from this realm, a new place awaits with golden oaks and white elms. The pasture of the goddess, a place of peace, of love, of solace. The sigils in the center of the circle glowed an eerie yellow as the air took on a similar tinted haze and smell of sulfur. It became weighty and thick when Annabelle recited the arcane invocation. Cody's face morphed from sexy tempter into a scowl of rage. What are you doing? What we should have done a long time ago, Annabelle said. She slammed the text shut with a wave of her hand. The sound of the closing book made everyone jerk their heads to look at it. Black demon mist swirled in towards the book. Skeletal fingers formed from the fog and grasped it. What are you doing? Annabelle said with a scowl. I had to assume she was talking to the bodiless hands that gripped the book. Annabelle stepped forward and grabbed the tome and tugged it hard. Let go! This is not yours! Annabelle hissed. Without warning, another disembodied hand formed out of the dense black vapor and scratched the back of Annabelle's hand, left huge red welts along long scratch that wept blood. Ow! Annabelle pulled her hand back and cradled it, but as she let go, the demon claw released the book and let it drop. The book spun slightly and moved into the circle, obliterating one of the hex marks. No! Annabelle screamed. The rest of us standing in our circles were terrified. Isaiah made moves to leave the hangar. You can't leave! Don't stay where you are! Annabelle commanded. The demon voices screamed out from behind the mist of Annabelle, and Cody hissed. Everyone whipped to look at the book. Its movement smeared more of the carefully written magical symbols. Cody laughed. You won't be doing anything now. Cody began to dissolve back into smoke as tails of his vapor edged its way out of the ritual space. The broken circle was his way out. There will be no escape for you, Annabelle said, except it wasn't her voice. You are now ours. The speech was layered. Several tones spoke at once. Her horde had addressed Cody as one entity. Annabelle blinked, and her eyes morphed into black orbs as dark as the pits they contained her demons. She curled her lips back and bared her teeth. Undecipherable words in a language I'd never heard flew from her quick moving lips. Annabelle was gone. The voices came from all over, her words echoing. Cody's white lips lashed out at Cody's white wisps lashed out at the encroaching demon mist. He shrieked as demon hands emerged from behind Annabelle and took hold of Cody's vapors. Oh my God, Camilla said as she covered her ears. I stood in the center of it all, feeling the temperature drop suddenly. I glanced over at Ning, only to see her, Yuki Onna, in full form, standing in her place. It was crouched, ready to strike, with blood-red eyes. Frost crystals crept out from her circle, forming intricate geometric patterns. I could see my breath, my chest heaving as the fear that had started only moments ago erupted into a bubble of terror that was quickly erasing any sensible thought in my head. From within her dark fog, an impossibly tall, thin demon materialized and took a few steps towards Cody, who was still screaming. His ethereal gases churned and twisted, attempting to break free of Annabelle's gasp. I see you. Annabelle's raspy voice squeaked out. Cody's rotting corpse reformed from the swirling white vapor. He glanced at me and scowled, then returned his glare to Annabelle. No, you can't touch me. James, you said you would protect me. You promised. I'm dying again. Don't do this. The thin fiend stretched out a clawed hand and pushed it into Cody's chest. All of us lurched forward as we felt the stabbing pain of the demon's hand puncturing into Cody's rotted torso. Annabelle continued to mumble out incantations, indiscernible. her eyes still pitch black, her hands splayed out to her sides, but now she was levitating, her toes gently brushing the concrete floor as ancient words tumbled out of her mouth. Annabelle, stop! You're killing us! Camilla screamed. The thin demon stretched himself forward, towering over Cody, and gripped his head in its impossibly large hand. And then he pulled up. The shriek was ear-splitting as Cody's head was removed from his body and the embedded demon hand ripped open a putrid trunk. Cody began to dissolve into tiny tails of white fog, swirling and undulating. Points of light erupted out from where Cody's heart should have been and burst forth like a firework eruption. Annabelle fell limp. Her hands dropped to her sides and her head hung awkwardly to the side, her mouth open, tongue hanging out. I rushed over, grabbed her shoulders, and shook her. I could feel the others tentatively approaching behind me, concerned for their classmate but unsure for their safety. I peered into Annabelle's open eyes. No iris or pupil existed, just white orbs. With tiny thread-like spread spider veins skittering across them, new veins began to appear. Help me. Annabelle had absorbed Cody into her horde. The words formed in red within the orbs, as if someone had scratched them into white paint with blood. I continued to shake Annabelle, yelling at her, Annabelle, wake up! Ah! That's my take on dark fantasy. And is, of course, my jam. If it's got demons involved, I love it.
It's a really great story. I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are 2 minutes away from the top of the hour. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Dorian and Glenn and Des for doing their readings with us today. It's been so much fun. I would love to open up for questions, but we've got to go and get ready for our next session. So we'll peace out and we'll see you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us.